I write about the relationship between culture and politics, and I'm particularly interested in the politics of representation. I write about a whole range of different kinds of work. I write about live performance mostly, but also about TV and film and video games. And my work is broadly located in the field of queer studies, so drawing on theorists like Judith Butler, whose work Gender Trouble turned up in the keynote as game trouble. So I'm kind of interested in the question of inclusion and exclusion and the kind of exercise of power and creativity and opportunity that might describe. So this word queer is a kind of consciously, deliberately prickly one. It's a difficult word. It's usefully difficult. So for today's purposes, though, just because the queer in queer studies refers to about 4,500 different things and nothing at all, we're going to stick with these working definitions just for the next 9.5 minutes. We want to think about queer as being this useful kind of umbrella term for a range of non-heterosexual identities. So queer is often used as a shorthand for kind of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans, as well as a range of other non-heterosexual kind of identifications. It's also used kind of critically as being resistant to the idea of fixed or narrow categories of identity. So we might think about perversely queering straightness to kind of point out the kinds of straight lives which don't fit neatly into the idea of a particular vision of what marriage looks like, for example. And broadly, it has this kind of driving imperative, which is about trying to address the complexity of human identity and experience. So if there's one driving imperative that cuts across kind of queer studies, and I go out on a limb to make this claim, it's the idea of trying to extend the range of lives which are livable. So what I want to do is kind of talk about a few kind of recurring dynamics in, kind of the slide said mainstream games. I probably should have said mass market games, kind of the big AAA games which are kind of enormously influential and sell millions of copies. I'm going to talk about a few kind of key dynamics and then spend a little moment at the end talking about a recent game, Dishonored 2, for what I think is a really lovely example of kind of complexity in game design that we maybe want to draw some lessons from. There will be spoilers at that point, so if you haven't played it or finished playing it yet, leave now, or use that as your excuse to leave now. So, my kind of argument is that queer kind of experiences in mainstream gaming tend to have the following qualities. Tend to. There are some interesting exceptions. The first thing is that it's really quite heavily genre-bound. So it's really very heavily associated with role-playing games, with opportunities for people to narrate or play out versions of themselves, or play out an alternative version of themselves. For this reason, it's heavily centered on ideas of player choice and agency being slightly different things. And it's also quite heavily cloistered, requiring an effort of discovery. So it's not necessarily hidden, but it requires an act of paying attention. It requires decisions to be made or a route to be taken. My favorite example of the digital cloister is the planet Makeb. Anyone heard of this? It is in Star Wars: The Old Republic, the online game, and Makeb is the gay planet. In the entire extended Star Wars universe, it's the only place where there are same-sex relationships. The only place. One hell of a planet. But cloistered, the idea, it's kind of not excluded, but it's selectively included. And the other kind of point maybe I should have included with this is that LGBT content is very closely associated with a number of major publishers. So the work of Bethesda and the work of BioWare, I think, are really closely associated and have devoted fan bases for that reason. So we have a couple of franchises which are known for their inclusion of opportunities to play queer or encounter kind of gay and lesbian and trans characters. So Dragon Age and Fable, Skyrim and Mass Effect are kind of being the big named kind of franchises there. Frequently, this idea of kind of of player choice begins at the point of character customization. I think this is a really good tell on how these mass market games deal with the question of, or the possible question of queerness. So we're kind of quite familiar with the opportunities that we have for determining what our character's like at the outset. Yeah, kind of the generic screens. This one's from Skyrim, known for its slightly unusual faces in its franchise, but getting better, we hope. But we can kind of pick our body shape, our skin tone, our ethnicity, our species, but also in kind of some games, our class, and in the case of Mass Effect, a kind of history. So we're bringing the character from an earlier installment of the game forward with us into the new installment. What I think is really interesting is what is chosen to be an active choice and what is left out. These opportunities for character design, these kind of possibilities for customization, proliferate. There are a huge number of ways in which you can tweak your avatar to resemble you or to play out a fantasy. The question you are never asked, and I would love if there are any exceptions in mass market games that you could offer to me, the question you are never asked is whether you would like to play this game as a straight person or not. So, even though we have the pitching of different forms of physiology as a way of exploring difference, no one ever says sexuality is significant. So we have this idea in game design where sexuality is left to basically be done procedurally, and it plays out with characters responding to your stated interest. You flirt with them, and they flirt back. It's very rare that an NPC proactively flirts with you. It mirrors your interests. So, I'm going to cut to the chase of this character just because I've really got a minute left. So, we have this new game, Dishonored 2, which is a sequel to Arcane Studios' original game Dishonored, I think from 2012. And in it, you have a choice of player characters. So, you have Corvo, who's the protagonist of the original game, and on the right-hand side, you have his daughter, Emily, who's a new kind of player character. During the course of the game, you encounter this character called Megan Foster, who represents a kind of range of different forms of difference in one character. She's a kind of key character. You go back and meet her several times. Her boat is a kind of hub between missions. So we have this figure who has a visible disability, who's missing an eye, who's missing an arm. She's black, and also from the kind of contextual information in the game, we discover that she's bisexual. And one of the kind of game designers, when I have to look at my notes for his name, has said, Megan prefers women. So we have a bisexual woman in the center of this game. Now, apart from the fact that this is a kind of single character who represents various different forms of diversity, there's interesting points of contact to player choice. So there's a dynamic that plays out during the game where, for reasons of plot, you travel backwards in time. And the consequences of your actions change what happens in the future, which means that you re-encounter Megan, and she has an arm and an eye again. This is not mentioned anywhere in the game text. It just happens. You are a privileged observer. But suddenly this character and their presence in the world changes, and you're led to ask yourself what other changes are happening out of sight. So, this is really just to end with praise of complexity and character design with a few characteristics we maybe want to emphasize. First of all, we have this backstory which is interlaced with a player character's own narrative. We later discovered that Megan Foster is a previously known character to us called Billie Lurk, who was involved in some plot from the previous game. We have this sense of a complex character with multiple characteristics, but they are all kind of made present to us and distinctive, but they're never directly addressed as being plot consequential or being something of special significance. And there's also this interesting point of resonance, that if you're playing as Emily Caldwin, which is the other player character, there's documents, again, letters that you can read in the game world, which suggest you have a lover called Wyman, whose gender is never determined. So there's this possibility of a resonance between Billie Lurk's bisexuality and maybe the sexuality of the female player character that you are playing. So I'll wrap up there saying we have these kind of larger issues, and this was pub conversation. One is the challenge of this representative minority. We have one character saddled with representing all kinds of difference. We have an interesting question about the representation of disability. It's gone, seemingly without any consequence. And we also have the question of prominence. Is visibility, is actively visible, is prominent characters what's desired, is that what's necessary, is that what makes for good games? I'll stop there. Thank you.